Good morning, all of you.
Good morning, sir.
Okay, let's start with our next content. Okay, yesterday we have started to study regarding the artificial neural network, and regarding that, yesterday we have covered what exactly mean by the biological neural network, and that study will help us to understand what exactly is the artificial neural network is. So yesterday we have discussed the biological neural network and what exactly it plays its role in the functioning of the human brain and functioning or performing the activity by the human being. So you can see if you see the yesterday's point that we have discussed as a biological neural network, it is consist of the billions of neurons which are being connected to each other, and that each of the neurons is having their different components, and with the help of that different components the human nervous system works, or the with the help of that whole network human can perform the various kind of activities, like the human can perform the various kind of computation, identification, recognition, comparison, whatever the things that human being does, that it does with the help of that biological nervous system, which is nothing but also referred as a biological neural network. Now my question to you is what? Now, as a biological neural network which is being there as a part of the brain of the human, now suppose if you want to create the artificial human, such as for example artificial agent or the robot, now how it is possible to replicate same kind of this biological network in case of artificial human being or in case of the robot? That is my question. Yes, all of you understood the question? How we can replicate the biological neural network in case of the robot or in case of the artificial human? How it will be possible? Yes. Now already we have studied the biological neural network and its functioning for the human being. That is a so biological neural network in case of the human being is get created naturally when we born. It comes within our bodies and in our brain automatically, and as the day passes, the time passes, that different components of our brain they get learns, their development happens, and accordingly our intelligence get built. Now if we want such kind of neural network, if we want such kind of brain to be developed in the robot, as we can call it as an artificial human, then how it will become possible? What has to be done for that? That is my question. Yes. How it will become possible? Yes, Sonal. Shantanu. All of you got the question or not?
Yes, sir.
Then try to answer.
So artificial brain takes input from external world
Hmm.
and link them to each other.
So what I'm trying to say now, in case of the biological neural network, there is a neuron. Then neuron is having different components like dendrites, axon, etc., etc. With the help of that, our we can perform the different activity. We can perform the different computation, etc., etc. Now, if you want to replicate same kind of system in case of the robot, then how it can be done? That is my question. Hmm. Yes. How it can be done? How the artificial brain can be developed? There must be some answer in your mind. You should share it with me. It might be right, wrong, doesn't matter, so that we can proceed the discussion on that. Hmm? If you don't speak
So
up any.
artificial
Hmm. Ah,
so
yes.
artificial neuron means mathematical statistics
Hmm, hmm,
functions
hmm. Good.
because the neurons function is not possible like biological neuron.
Yes, in case of the robots, we cannot have the natural brain that is being present in the human being. It is not possible to create that, like creation of the dendrites and that kind of nerve cells in the natural way in
Yes.
case of the robot. So we have to
Yes, sir.
create such a kind of model. We have to create such a kind of model which will replicate the same activity of the
Work.
human nervous system. Is it like that?
Yes. Yes.
And
Working and function.
to
Yes.
create that kind of model, we need what we need then. We need to utilize the various kind of complex algorithm, mathematical functions, plus this mathematical function complex algorithm we need to apply with some kind of intelligent hardware systems. Yes or no? Integrated chips
Yes.
will require.
Yes, sir.
We need to integrate with some different kind of circuits, etc., etc. And when we develop such a kind of artificial brain with the help of that circuits, integrated chips, VLSI designs, complex algorithm, mathematical function, then that kind of system is called as what? Artificial brain. And when we create each of these different when we create such kind of artificial neurons, just like we have seen yesterday the biological neuron in structure. So we have to, when we create some billions of artificial neuron, each of these artificial neuron will consist of some mathematical function. You know, to run that we need some complex algorithm programming, some circuits. When we connect these all artificial neurons together, then that network which get formed, that is called as what? The artificial neural net.
Neural
Got the point?
networks. Yes, sir.
The biological neuron, that single neuron structure yesterday we have discussed. Okay, so same kind of artificial neuron we have to create, that is being already getting created. Understood? And that kind of artificial neurons, just like in the human brain, there are billions of neurons are present. Okay, and that billions of neurons are connected to each other, and then they form the biological neural network. When we replicate such kind of neurons with some artificial neurons, now in order to form the artificial neurons, what we need the different circuits, chips, designs, complex algorithm, mathematical function. And when we connect these artificial neuron to each other, that network which get formed, that network is then called as what? Artificial neural network. Got this point?
Networks. Yes, sir.
So that is nothing but referred as the artificial neural network. And so same point I have mentioned in the next few slides. So different scientists and the computational neurobiologists have constructed very explanatory and elaborative computer model of neurons in order to run the detailed simulation of the particular circuits in the brain. Just like the biological brain works, simulation of that biological brain can be done with the help of the particular circuits. Understood? So scientists have implemented such a model neurons in with the help of the hardware as some electronic circuits, often being integrated on some VLSI chip along with some complex algorithms and the programs. So just yesterday we have seen the biological neurons forms with the help of some dendrites, axons, synapses, nucleus, etc., etc. So here the artificial neurons will form with the help of some circuits, with the help of some integrated VLSI chips, with the help of some complex algorithm mathematical function. With the help of that, our artificial neuron will form. So you must get here what is the difference between the biological neurons and what is the difference between the biological neuron and artificial neurons. I hope you must have got the difference between the biological neuron and artificial neuron. Both of the neurons are being built with the aim in the mind that both will perform the same functionality. But the component which is present in these biological neuron and artificial neurons are same or the different. Components of the biological neuron and components of the artificial neuron will same or different. Yes. Which are the components of the biological neurons? Biological neuron form with the help of which components?
Mathematical models.
Biological neuron, biological, natural neuron.
Sorry.
The neuron which is present in our brain, it is formed with the help of which component? Yesterday we have seen that.
Nervous system.
That nervous system is having the collection of neurons. So that neurons is having different components, elements. Which are that?
Dendrites, axon.
Dendrite, axon, nucleus, etc., etc. Artificial neuron is having which elements?
Chips, mathematical models.
Yes, chips, mathematical functions, algorithm, circuits, etc., etc. So this concept you need to understand, then and then only you can understand what exactly is the artificial neural network. So in the biological neural network, we connect different biological neurons together, billions of biological neurons together, and then our biological neural network forms. In case of the artificial neural network, when we connect these artificial neurons together, that network which form, that is called as what? The artificial neural networks. So an artificial neural network is the component of artificial intelligence, main component of artificial intelligence. Without the ANN, artificial intelligence cannot work. So that's why here I have mentioned ANN is the component of artificial intelligence that is meant to simulate or copy or replicate the functioning of the human brain. So when we create the ANN, just like the biological neural network, the main aim behind that is what? It should perform the activity, the same kind of activity that is being performed by the human brain. And that's why we need to create the artificial neuron within the ANN. Okay. So in the modern sense, the artificial neural network is composed of the various kind of artificial neurons or the various kind of nodes, or which is also being referred as various kind of processing units. Artificial neurons can be called as the various kind of processing units or computational units. These things you should keep in mind. Okay, artificial neuron can be referred by another term, that is the processing units or the computational units. Okay, that structure we are going to see. So the artificial neural network is made up of the various kind of artificial neurons for solving the different kind of artificial intelligence problem. So just like in a human body, there is a biological neurons, to solve the various kind of human intelligence problems. So here same, we have the artificial neurons, which is being there to solve the various kind of artificial intelligence problems. So in the further part also, I have mentioned the same thing that we have discussed now. So ANN are the computing system. What it is, the computing system purely inspired by the biological neural network that constitute the animal brain. So ANN, artificial neural network, is being formed with the help of the biological neural network. Just like the biological neural network works, the way biological neural network consists of various biological neurons and different components, in the similar way, by taking the reference of the biological neural network, artificial neural network is being built. Okay. So an ANN is based on the collection of connected units or processing units or nodes. Just I told you what ANN is consist of, what various kind of connected units or the processing units or nodes, that is being referred as the artificial neurons. Okay, which are being loosely model the neurons in the biological model, which will replicate or simulate the neurons which is present in the biological brain. Okay, means the way biological neurons perform, in the similar way artificial neurons are being made to perform the activity like the biological neurons. Okay, so just like in the biological neuron, we have the connections like the synapses are there in the biological brain, which are used to transmit the signal to the different neurons. Same kind of connections are also there in the artificial neural network to transmit the signal from one to transmit the signal from particular one neuron to the other neuron. Okay, so here also another definition of the ANN I have mentioned. ANN is the piece of the computing system, or it is the computing system designed to simulate. Simulate means what? I hope you are getting the meaning of simulate. Number of times I told you, piece of computing system designed to simulate, or designed to replicate, or designed to copy the human brain system. Okay, means what? Just the way human brain works, in the similar way artificial neural network is being made. That's why I have written here the ANN is the piece of computing system. Our brain also perform the computation. In the similar way, ANN is being built to perform the some kind of computing system designed to simulate in the sense replication or the copying the way human brain analyze and process the information. As you know, the human brain also analyze the different things, it process the different information, then perform the activity on that information. Using that information, it can take the decision. In the similar way, artificial neural network is also being built to perform these kind of various analysis and process the information. Okay, so it is a foundation or the main component of artificial intelligence which solve the problem that will prove the impossible or difficult by the human being or statistical standards. So artificial neural network can perform the activity which is more faster as compared with the human brain also. Okay, because of the kind of things we use to build the various kind of artificial neuron. Just like the human brain is human biological neural network is having the self learning capability, just like human learns number of activities by his own. In the similar way, ANN is also having the self learning capabilities. Artificial neural network is also having the self learning capabilities that enable them to produce the better results as more data becomes available. The more data become available, the more historical data is being become available for the artificial neural networks. More its experience get increased, then from that it learns the more things, it learns the number of things, and from that its learning capabilities get increased. It is same like the human being. The way human being perform the way human being learn the different things, the way human beings experience get increased, its learning capabilities get increased. In the similar way, ANN learning capabilities also get increased. But here in case of the ANN, its learning source is what? Its learning source is the different kind of data available. Okay, so that is the basic part related to the artificial neural networks. Okay, let's come to the point, that is the structure of neuron which is being there in the artificial neural network. Just like yesterday we have discussed the structure of the biological neuron, and that biological neuron consists of the different components. This is nothing but the structure of artificial neuron. The separate question being asked number of times on the artificial neuron structure. So this is the structure of the artificial neuron. All of you can able to see it.
Yes, sir.
So here you can see the point we were discussing. The point we were discussing, that artificial neuron consists of the various kind of different kind of circuits, mathematical function, complex algorithm, etc., etc. So here it look like this. Okay. So here you can see this is the single artificial neuron. Okay, which is being also called as processing unit also, which is also called as the processing unit also, or which is being also called as connecting unit also, or we can refer it by the single node also. Okay, so now we have to just apply the concept that we have studied yesterday regarding the biological neural network. As we have discussed, in the biological neural network, it consists of dendrites, nucleus, and axon, etc., etc. Now you tell me which are the components here, just like the artificial neuron, just like the biological neuron.
Synapse.
बरोबर, ठीक है sir. Okay, so what I'm asking you, just like the structure of the biological neuron yesterday we have discussed, this is the structure of the artificial neuron. Now what kind of components you are observing here, that is I am asking to you. What different things you are observing here? Yes, which different things you are looking at here? Are you able, all of you able to see this? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes. What things you are observing here? I hope all of you are having the working eyes. What you are observing here? Yes. Or you are not looking anything here? You could not able to see anything here?
Dendrites.
Where is the dendrites here?
Number of input.
You can see the number of inputs are there. Then
Summation.
summation function you can look at here. Then
Yes, sir. Activation
you can see
function.
the activation function is there. You can see the
Then
different weights
output.
are there. And then you can
Yes.
see the output is there.
Output there.
So these are the different components which is being performing the activities of different elements which is being present in the biological neurons. You cannot see here the dendrons, axon. It is not possible. That these are the natural elements present in the biological neuron. So we have to replicate their activity here with the help of different weights, with the help of different summation function, activation function, that's being referred as the different mathematical function, and with the help of the different circuits. So this is nothing but your artificial neurons look like. Okay, so this is the basic structure of artificial neural network neurons, which consist of artificial neurons. Now this is just similar to the biological neuron in the human brain. Here components are different, but its functionality is just similar to the artificial neurons. So that's why I have mentioned here the basic structure of artificial neural network consists of the artificial neuron, which is similar to the biological neuron in the human brain that are grouped into the layers. Okay, now these particular things you are observing here, this is the input part, this is the input part, then this is the output part. Okay, and this is also the one more part is there. Okay, now these particular neurons, this particular things is also get divided into different layers that we are going to see in the types of the ANN. Okay, so that's why I have mentioned here, this is being get divided into the different layers, where this particular part can be also considered as an input layer. Okay, and this particular part can also referred as a output layer.
Output.
Okay, so just the separation of the activity can be done by dividing it into the group of the layers. Okay, so the most common artificial neural network structure consists of the different kind of input layers, one or more hidden layers, and the output layers also. Regarding these layers, we are going to see in the types of the ANN. Okay, so this is being also referred as the artificial neuron, or it is being also referred as the processing unit, which create the artificial neural network. So how the artificial neural network forms? Artificial neural network forms with the help of billions of millions of these artificial neurons, or billions of millions of this kind of processing units. Okay, same thing I have mentioned here, processing units make the artificial neural network, which in turn consist of the inputs and outputs. Now here in this artificial neuron, or in this processing units, you can easily see some kind of input is given from here, like x1, x2 up to the xn. So this input is what? What do you mean by the input?
Enumerable.
Inputs are nothing but the different kind of data. Yes or no? In case of the artificial neural network, input is nothing but the various kind of data. Understood? Now with this data, some weights are also added here. This weight you can see W1, W2 up to the WM, etc. What do you mean by this weight? Now, when we give training to that particular artificial neurons, now that time some values get added. Some values get added with this particular, what we can say, each of these inputs or each of these data. That is being referred as a weights. So with each particular input, you can see the weights. Okay, each with input, you can see the different weights are there. Okay, so here I have mentioned inputs are nothing but the source data with an artificial neural network from which the ANN learn to produce some desired output. So from these given inputs, with some added weights, here lastly we get the some kind of output. Now between this part, now what this part does? This part does the computation. This part does what? Computation or the processing. Getting? Yes. This middle part doing what? Computation or the processing. And after performing the computation and processing, some output get generated. Now what do you mean by this output? Just like in the human brain, you receive some inputs from the environment and then you perform some action. Just like yesterday we have seen the example, when at the time of exam you have to woke up, the different signals get generated in your brain. Okay, and the signal which is having the highest strength, that signal get activated. Same thing is happen here. Different input signals, you can consider this as a different input signal. Okay, now processing of these different input signal happens here with the help of the various kind of activation function. So what is the activation function? Activation function is also the one kind of what we can consider as a mathematical functions. Okay, there are the different kind of activation function that we'll discuss. So here these inputs are sum up with these weights, and whatever the output here, that will be given to the activation function. Then activation function performs some processing, and then the output will get generated. Okay, so let's see the some details regarding these in the next part. So just like in the human brain, okay, in the human brain, neurons communicate by sending signal to each other through the complex connection. as you have seen yesterday. In the similar way, on the base of that only, artificial neural network are based on the same principle, the principle where in the biological neurons are being communicate with each other by sending the signal. On the same principle, ANN are based where the different artificial neuron try to simulate the learning process, the way human brain neurons learns. Okay, but here the artificial neural network neurons learn with the help of what? They learn with the help of the various kind of complex algorithms. This thing you should understand. What? The artificial neurons in case of the ANN, how they learn? With the help of the different complex algorithms and the programming that we have to write. With the help of that, our neurons works. We have to give training to the neurons, okay, with the help of the complex algorithms and the programming, and then our artificial neural network form. You are getting this point?
Yes, sir.
It is not just like the human being learn from the various experiences, but here experience in case of the artificial neurons is what? We have to provide some data, then we have to utilize some complex algorithm, and then our artificial neuron will learn, and then our artificial neural network will perform the activity just like the human brain. Okay, so here I have mentioned every connection has a weight attached with it, which may have either positive weight or the particular weight can be the positive value or the negative value associated with it.
Negative
Now
value.
when we give training to this artificial neuron with some inputs, with some data, that time these weights are nothing but some values. These weights are nothing but some values are being combined with these inputs. Now these weights can be a positive values or they can be a negative value associated with that particular inputs. Okay, when the weights are positive, see here, when the weights are positive, it activates the neurons. Means what? When weights are positive, which are combined with these inputs, what it does? It activates the neurons. Means excitatory signal get generated. Are you getting? Yes.
Yes, sir.
When weights are positive, which kind of signal get generated? Excitatory. Now excitatory signal that yesterday we have discussed in case of the biological neurons. Here artificial neurons get activated means what? Excitatory signals get generated. And when negative weights are there, then which signal will get generated?
Inhibitory.
Inhibitory. Excitatory सिग्नल डज व्हॉट? एक्साइटेटरी आपल्याला काहीतरी प्रोत्साहन देतं काहीतरी करण्यासाठी. इनिबिटरी सिग्नल डज व्हॉट? इट स्टॉप यू डुईंग
Negative.
समथिंग. अंडरस्टूड? तर हे जे आहे काहीतरी करायला प्रोत्साहन देणे आणि stop you to do and stopping you to do something, that is being decided on the basis of what? On the basis of these given inputs. Okay, as you can see, with each of these connection there is some weight attached. Now what is the meaning of this weight? From weight what things can be get decided? As you can see, I have mentioned every connection has a weight attached, which may be either positive or the negative. What do you mean by the positive weight? What do you mean by the negative weight? Yes, what is the meaning of positive weight and what is the meaning of negative weight?
Positive weight activate the neuron.
Yes, means what? Activate the neurons means
Means काहीतरी करायला प्रोत्साहन देतं.
it encourage to do something. That is the meaning of positive weight. And negative weight what? It
Do
prohibit,
not
it
something.
stop you doing something. आता हे जे आपण बायोलॉजिकल न्यूरॉन्स मध्ये हे ऍक्टिव्हिटी कशाच्या थ्रू परफॉर्म केल्या जातात? थ्रू विच एलिमेंट these activities get decided in biological neuron? Through the synapses. Yes or no? Through the
Yes,
excitatory
sir.
synapses and through the इनिबिटरी सिनॅप्स.
Inhibitory
पण इथं
synapse.
काय, इथं आपल्याला एक वी हॅव टू युटिलाइज द डिफरंट we have to utilize here the some kind of what you can say some parameters we have to utilize, mathematical parameters we have to utilize in the form of the weight. Got this point?
Yes, sir.
Then here I have in detail I have mentioned regarding the weight also. Weight as a parameter, weight represents the strength of the connection between these different units. If the weight from the node 1 to the node 2, node is nothing but the, also you can refer the node as a neurons also. Okay, node is the another word for the neurons. If the weight from the node 1 to the node 2 has a greater magnitude, it means that neuron 1 has a greater influence over the neuron 2. A weight decides the importance of input value. If the weight of the neuron 1 is greater than the weight of the neuron 2, then which activity will get performed? Activity of the neuron 1 or activity of the neuron 2? If the neuron 1 is having the higher weight as compared with the neuron 2, then activity of which neuron will get performed? Neuron 1 activity or the neuron 2 activity?
Neuron 1.
Definitely the neuron 1 activity will get performed. That's why I have mentioned here a weight on neuron decide the importance of the input value, and accordingly the activity can be get decided. Okay. One more component you can see here, which is most important, the bias. All of you can able to see?
Yes, sir.
Which is being gets combined here through the summation function. Now bias is what? It is it is considered as a constant. Okay, and it is being always considered as a 1. So here I have mentioned bias as a constant are the additional input to the next layer that will always have the value 1. The bias unit guarantee that even when all the inputs are 0, there will still be an activation in the neuron. This is very important. Now, even you are not doing any kind of activity. Okay, let's see the example of human being first. Even you are not doing any kind of activity, still your brain remains in some active situation. Is it correct?
No, sir.
Yes. If you even if you are not doing any kind of activity, your brain used to be in some kind of active mode.
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
All of you want to say the no? Means what you want to say? When you are sleeping also, your brain is not in the active condition.
Yes, sir. Active condition.
Is it in the active condition or not?
Yes, sir. Active condition.
Means what I am trying to show, what I am trying to say, even human being is not doing any kind of activity, there is some part in our brain which used to be in the active mode. Is it correct?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes, sir.
So in case of the artificial neuron, to keep the artificial brain in the active mode, even the robot is not doing any kind of activity, or even that artificial agent is not doing any kind of activity, still to keep that artificial brain in the active mode, there is the utilization of bias. You are got the point, bias. And that's why its value is always set to the 1. Understood here? That's why I mentioned the bias units guarantee that even when all the inputs are 0, in the sense what, is there any activities going on?
No, sir.
No. So even all the inputs are 0, there will be still an activation in the neuron. You are getting the point? Even there is no
Yes, sir.
activity being performed, the neuron need to be in the active mode, and that is being set with the help of which component? Bias component. Got the point? Got the meaning of bias?
Yes, sir.
So what is the functionality of bias element? To keep the neuron in the active mode even there is no activity happening. Understood?
Yes, sir.
To keep the artificial brain awake every time. To keep the artificial brain awake every time. Even in the human being, the brain of the human being always in the active mode. Even you are sleeping also. Yes or no? Even we are sleeping also, our brain used to be in the always in the awake mode. Yes or no? Always be in the
Yes, sir.
active mode.
Yes, sir.
We feel that as we are sleeping, our brain is also sleeping, but it is not like that. Understood?
Yes, sir.
So that kind of to keep your brain, to keep the artificial brain in and the activation, there is a utilization of the bias element. Okay. Now in the figure, you can easily see the part that we have discussed. Figure shows the network structure with some inputs. These are the inputs x1, x2 up to the xn being connected to the neurons with some weights. So each of these inputs being having some weight associated with that. Okay, that is I have mentioned here. So the neurons sum all the signal it receive with each signal being multiplied by associated with weights on the connection, and then the activation function generates some output like y output I have shown here. Okay, so here you can see the summation function. So in the summation, all the features are multiplied by their weights and bias are sum up. So here what activity is getting performed? See, it's very important. Summation of what and what? Summation of weight plus summation of these inputs plus bias. Then this is being get created here. Okay. मग याच्यामधून जे output, whatever the things will generated from this summation function, that will be given to whom? Activation function. आणि मग कुठली ऍक्टिव्हिटी परफॉर्म करायची किंवा करायची नाही, which activity to perform or whether to not perform, that is decided by which function? Activation function decided with whatever the input it received from this summation function, and then final output will be get generated. This is the output of the single neuron, or this is the output of whole ANN. Yes.
Yes, sir.
This is the output of the single neuron or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, this is the output of what? Single neuron. Then again, this output is being given to the next neuron. Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
You are getting this output is then given to the next neuron and then again to the next neuron, and that is the reason why I am referring it as artificial neural network. Correct or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And accordingly, the different activities get performed in the artificial brain in the robots. Okay. So same thing I have mentioned here, the output of the each neuron is computed by some linear on the non-linear function of some of its input. The activation functions are linear also, activation functions are non-linear also. That we'll see which functions are being considered as activation function. Okay. Neurons and edges are typically have the weight that adjusts the learning proceed. Okay, so using these different weights, the training is given to the neurons, etc., etc. Okay, weight increases or the decreases, and accordingly strength of the signal also get increase or the decrease. Then here in the specifically I have mentioned the activation function. So activation function are nothing but some kind of mathematical equation that determine the output of neural network. The main work of the activation function is what? Converting the input into the output in the shorter way. What main function of the activity function is what? Activation function is what? Conversion of the inputs into the outputs. Okay. So the function is attached to the each neuron. Each neuron is having the activation function in this network, and that activation function determines whether it should be activated or not. Means whether it should perform some activity or whether it should not perform some activity. It is get decided by with the help of what? It is get decided with the help of the activation function. Okay. So same point I have mentioned here. This function is attached to the each neuron in the network, and that determines whether it should be activated, whether it should be fire, or whether it should not be get activated. And this is being get decided based on whether each neuron input is relevant for the model prediction. Okay. So in the artificial neural network, the activation function of the node defines output of that node given an input or set of inputs. So whatever the inputs are being provided, on the basis of that, the activation function will apply on that, and then some kind of output will be get generated, and there this output is nothing but the performing some kind of activity. So a standard integrated circuit can be seen as a digital network of activation function. Now there is a utilization of some circuits also. Okay, some integrated circuits, chips, integrated circuit in the sense the IC or the chips, and with the help of that, the activation function is get in the running mode, and then it fires some action, and accordingly you can see the robot perform some activity. It can be a positive activity or the negative activity. Okay, so now when at which certain point this activation performs some activity, okay, there must be some starting point. Yes or no? When this activation function will going to generate some value. Yes or no? This activation function will going to generate some value. Correct? Yes or no? Output of the activation will be what? Some kind of value, and on the basis of that value some action will be taken. Is it like that? Yes. What will be the output of the activation function? Will it be some value or not?
Yes, sir.
The activation function, after doing some computation, after doing some processing, it will also perform some value. And when it reaches to some particular value, then the action will be get performed. Is it like that? There needs to be some particular limit, there needs to be some particular scale, there need to be some particular value. If the activation function reaches to that value, then only the activity will be get performed, then the activity will be get fire. Is it like that? Yes. Or if
Yes,
the
sir.
activation perform any value, then the activity then also the activity will get performed. Is it like that? Based on the any value, can the activity will be performed, or some specific value need to be generated?
Any value.
Any value. If the activation function reaches to the any value, then activity will be performed. Then how the specific activity will get performed, whether to do something or whether to not to do something.
Do something.
So to do something or not to do something, this activation function need to produce some value. Okay, it need to produce some value, and when it produce that value is referred as the threshold. What that value is referred as? What? Threshold value.
Threshold.
What do you mean by the threshold? Before this you must have heard about the threshold. What is the meaning of threshold? Threshold means what? Yes, threshold value. Threshold means what? Some specific value. Yes or no? Threshold value means what? Some specific value or not? You have not heard the word threshold before this? Yes. Now if in the activation function it is being mentioned that activity will get performed only if the value generated by the activation function is between 0 to 1. What? When the activity will be get performed? When the value generated by the activation function between 0 to 1, then only the certain activity will get performed. Then this value between the 0 to 1 can be considered as a threshold value.
Yes, sir.
So that is I am trying to say, in order to activity will in order to perform the activity with the help of the value of the activation function, this activity function need to perform some, need to generate some value, and if that value is crossing this threshold, or is the if that value is according to the threshold, then only some signal will be get generated. Understood? That's why I have mentioned here neurons may have threshold value such that signal is sent only if the aggregate signal crosses that threshold. If you are considering the threshold as a 0.5, if you are considering the threshold as a 0.5, now in order to generate the signal with the help of the activation function, in order to generate the signal with the help of the activation function, this particular the value generated by the activation function need to be crossed 0.5, yes or no? If you are considering the threshold value as a 0.5, now when the signal will be get generated, when the value generated by the activation function will cross the threshold. What is the threshold? For example, here we are considering the threshold as a, for example, 0.5, correct? Now when the activity will be get performed, when the value generated by the activation function will cross this 0.5, means it should be a 0.51, 0.52, etc., etc. Understood? So based on the predefined threshold value, based on the predefined threshold value, if the activation function generate the value which is crossing this threshold value, then only some signal will be get generated, and that is the utilization of the threshold value in the activation function. So here I have mentioned a threshold is the any amount, or it is the any level or limit on the scale. So it is being decided by the activation, it is being decided by the activation function, how much should be the threshold value, and after generating which value by the activation function, if that value crossing this threshold value, then only some output will be get generated. Okay, so as already I told you, these different neurons, as I mentioned, if there are the neurons at this level, this is being considered under the which layer? Input layer. Okay, if neurons are at this level, these are being considered in the output layer. That layer part we'll discuss next time. Okay, you have to just consider, you have to just keep in mind, neurons are combined into the different layers. Okay, and different layers are having their different activity to be get performed. Okay, so like there are the input layers, there are the output layers, also hidden layer is also there, that we will discuss when we discuss the types of the ANN. Okay, so here main purpose of our activation function is nothing but to convert the weighted sum of input signal of neuron into the output signal, simply to convert the input into the output, and
Output.
it can convert that with the help of the activation. Who is doing that activity? Activation function, with the help of
Function.
some threshold value, etc., etc. If the value generated by the activation function is greater than the threshold, then certain kind of activity will be get performed.
Perform.
Then, so point that we should understand next one, which the question is also asked number of times, the different kind of activation functions. I already we have discussed what is the activation function, what is its role, etc., etc. So there are the various kind of activation functions are being utilized. Like this is the first one, the linear function. It take the inputs multiplied by the weight for each neuron. It take the input like this. Okay, which is being multiplied by the weights and create the output signal proportional to the input. Okay. But the another thing related with the linear function is what? It produces the multiple outputs. Now, what do you mean by the multiple outputs? You just keep in mind, you will understand what do you mean by the multiple outputs when we discuss the next function. So you have to just keep in mind the linear function produces the multiple outputs. How? By multiplying the inputs with the weights and the adding it with the bias. Okay. So another kind of activation function is there, which is the Heaviside step function. Okay. And this is the most commonly and mostly utilized activation function in the neural network. And this produces the binary output. Binary output in the sense what? Output only in the form of the 0 and 1. What? Output only in the form of what? 0 and 1. But previous function that I said, linear function, that produce the multiple outputs. Now, what do you mean by the multiple outputs and the binary outputs? Multiple output in the sense like 0.1, 0.2, likewise. That is produced by which activation function? Linear activation function. Understood? And on the basis of activity will get decided. But this function, Heaviside step function, will generate which values only?
Binary.
Only binary. Only 0 or 1.
And 1.
When it produces the 1, which we know 1 in the sense true. Now when it produces the 1, you can see here the function produces the 1 or 2 when input passes threshold limit, and it produces the 0 or false when input does not pass the threshold. Now already I told you the threshold, some specific value. Some specific value. If the specific value decided is, for example, 5. How much? 5. Now, 5. After giving the input and summating it with the these weights and the bias, and then processing performed by the activation function, if it produces the value which is greater than this 5, for example, I am telling you, 5 is what?
Threshold
value. Barabar?
Value.
5 is a threshold value. Ata ita these inputs, and this input has to be combined with what? This weight and the bias, correct? That is done by what? This summation function. Understood? Summation function कडून जे काही जनरेट होईल ते कुणाला दिले जाईल? Activation function. मग activation function जी व्हॅल्यू जनरेट करणार आहे, फॉर एक्झाम्पल activation function generate the 4. I am just telling you the example. If the activation function generate the 4, then tell me which binary output will be get generated by the Heaviside step function?
0.
0 will be get generated. Yes or no? But if the activation function generate the value 6, then what will be the output of the activation function?
1.
1. Exactly. That is the thing I have mentioned here. The function produces the 1 true when the input passes the threshold limit. Now, what do you mean by the function produces the 1 as a true? What is the meaning of this? How we can relate its meaning? Yes.
Threshold limit.
Threshold limit cross केलं म्हणून 1 produce झाली. Then from that which things can be done?
Output can be generated.
Means it is the encourage or the discourage?
Encourage.
Exactly. It is what? Encourage. Means it is giving you the encouragement to do something. Is it like that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It is the encouragement for robot to perform some activity. That is like the meaning of this part.
Yes, sir.
And when it is 0, Then what do you mean by that? Don't do that. Is it like that? If the heaviside step function produces the zero, means what?
Does not pass its no.
Means don't perform any activity. It is the meaning, correct?
Yes, sir.
So that is nothing but your this heaviside step function.
Step
This is what?
function.
Another type of the activation function. Got the meaning?
Function. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
याचा if you want to compare this with the linear function फक्त 0 आणि 1 प्रोड्यूस करतं का?
नाही.
नाही, it produce the multiple output. Then which is the beneficial to decide which activity to perform? Heaviside step function or the linear function?
Heaviside step
Heaviside.
function.
This is also called as non-linear function also, for your knowledge. This is also called as what? Non-linear function.
Function.
Understood now?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
So thoroughly we have discussed all the basics or the main points regarding what exactly is the artificial neuron and its activity and the roles. Still we have to study different types of the ANN. आपण आतापर्यंत फक्त काय स्टडी केलं की एक्झॅक्टली वन आर्टिफिशियल न्यूरॉन काय ऍक्टिव्हिटी परफॉर्म करतो? येस ऑर नो?
Yes, sir.
And how it does that? Correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you need to go through this once again, and so that the concepts get more clear. Okay, so that's it from the today's lecture. Okay, today we will discuss the multiple number of things. We have first discussed what exactly is the ANN, then what is the artificial neuron, then basic structure of artificial neuron, how the different processing activity get performed, what is the weight, what is the bias, then we have seen how this processing and summation happens. Okay, then also we have discussed regarding the what is exactly the activation function, what is the role of the threshold value here. I hope you have got the threshold value.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
it is a specific value. We cannot say it is a part of that complex algorithm to decide the particular threshold value, etc., etc. Understood? But we have seen with the help of the threshold value how the activation function can decide whether to perform the activity or whether to not perform the activity. Correct?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that's it from the today's lecture. Okay, next time we will discuss regarding the types of the ANN. That will be the last part of our this unit. Okay,
Yes, sir.
tomorrow I will ask the question on this topic, so you need to go through all this so that you
Yes,
can
sir.
understand the next part. Shall we stop here now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you all of you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.